These are just some of the best horror games you can play during the Halloween week. If you're looking at the video and you're thinking to yourself, Toothless Kumquat Legend of Bungdor's Cabin isn't on the list, don't fret, it's not called every single scary game list. I even put a big honorable mention at the end of this. It's all what you like, what I've liked. Some titles that I've played, some titles I've enjoyed, some that I didn't necessarily love, but I still think fit the mood. You've got your horror, terror, scary, supernatural, sadomasochism, unease, unreality, and maybe a little Undying. I'm sure there's others who have their own ideas. These are mine. Post yours in the comments so people can grab them. Thumbs it up or comment or subscribe. First up, Condemned. This is best if you like True Detective or X-Files. Condemned Criminal Origins is a first-person survival game. This was developed by Monolith Productions, originally released by Sega in 2005. That's right, Sega. Then, it was a pretty big surprise. In Condemned, you're FBI agent Ethan Thomas, who's a member of the Serial Crimes Unit, as you track down a serial killer in some destitute city blocks. It's set in a crime-ridden city, and the story thrusts you pretty much into a grim world almost right away as you become a fugitive after being framed for a murder. As you go around and search for the real killer, it starts to take you through all of these weird locations as the game slowly descends. Abandoned buildings, subway stations, and other really scary locations, at least for a lot of gamers. Along the way, you have to contend with all of these kind of violent vagrants and deranged individuals who've mysteriously been driven to madness, and that's one part of the plot. Condemned was one hell of a title when it came out on the 360 and later on the PC. It's nasty detective work in a world bent just a bit, making you constantly at odds with wherever you are, or whatever you're seeing, or whoever you're talking with. To give you an idea, if a normal person would be shocked at what a police officer or police detective would see in their life and the distance between those two, the same can be said between Ethan's normal life and what you experience in Condemned. Luckily, the game does have a combat system and has you beating the ever-living shit out of everybody who seems to be driven to madness, or at least you think so. Who knows, maybe somebody took their last grape dropper and the stores have them on some kind of don't sell them cough medicine list. For whatever reason, Condemned is one half finding puzzles and one half kicking the shit out of anyone daring to be in the vicinity of them, all the while watching your sanity slowly erode like the buildings you explore. Pipes and axes and 2x4s, and of course, since this is a horror game, Ethan has his own light. And then you have ammo that's scarce as hell. That's fine because the combat system of the game is actually pretty good, with you blocking and countering and swinging around all the different enemies. Everyone you fight, though, feels weirdly human. And that means their patterns are more unpredictable than many horror games that are on this list or that we talk about, and they can hunt Ethan all throughout the environments, hide behind corners, and surprise attack, making a lot of encounters feel dangerous and more variable than you might expect. That enemy AI paired with the sheer brutality of the combat can make you actually feel vulnerable throughout the entire game, something that we see in other games that sort of starts to go away as you continue through it. But if this was just a bum beat-up simulator, it wouldn't be on the list. Condemned integrates a ton of investigative mechanics into the title. Ethan's dropped in there with his forensic tools that allow him to analyze the crime scenes, gather evidence, and piece together the clues to track down the real killer and to hopefully get him off the killer list. But each step you take is like the movie Seven, except the box at the end is each building and location in Condemned, offering you a little bit more information as you move through each one. While the game does have a sequel, and that was good, overall, I actually feel like I enjoyed the original Condemned more. A great game with a solid premise that didn't get bogged down in a ton of systems, but instead asks the question, what if someone accustomed to getting in over his head finds out that he's 2 levels deeper than that? And what can you do as a player? Here's why I think it's worth it, though, and why it's on the list. The down and dirty combat, it hits hard. Instead of how many licks to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop, it's how many licks do you need to put in on some bearded, shambling man wearing threadbare pants before they collapse, like John Jones' personal life when he isn't fighting. Add that to the mix of psychological thriller encrusted with consistently questioning how or what you're seeing and how it all pertains to the character themselves. Down and dirty, bit more reality. Fantastic title to play during Halloween. Next up, Soma. This is best if you liked Sphere or some of the Black Mirror episodes. Soma was developed by Frictional Games. It's a 2015 first-person survival horror game that sets itself apart from a lot of horror experiences, not only its environment, but how it plays out. Soma is one of the few games based almost solely underwater, so if you have one of the hundreds of deep water phobias, as well as a serious sadomasochistic streak, this one might be for you. And it's based in an underwater research facility called Pathos II, which is overshadowing in the way of saying, I'm going to shoot you now, kind of overtly brutal style. However, because the last remnants of humanity's fought for survival here, after some massive catastrophic event, the location itself has a ton of mystery as you work through it. However, the world doesn't. As Simon explores the decaying station, he realizes almost instantly that nothing is right. Malfunctioning robots, twisted creatures, and more examples that whatever everyone was doing here would have broken about 4,000 scientific moral codes. Builds up all the way through it. But it's also designed well enough to get the horror fan interested who maybe isn't actually interested in the location, but is looking for interesting monster designs. This one has it. They're horrifyingly integrated with the machines themselves. They have tense moments where you're consistently trying to sneak past or use distractions to survive. Also, Simon isn't a Navy SEAL, nor is an 18-year-old boy with parents who hate him, so they bought him a Polaroid camera just so he happens to be able to kill enemy ghosts with. Simon is pretty much nobody and nothing, so running and hiding like a little bitch is the name of the game here. The visual style of the game overall, the environment, flooded tunnels, and all this unsettling machinery infused with organic life means that the world is fascinating, but also has this tinge and reflection of normal humanity, which I loved. Where Soma excels is that it doesn't talk down to the player, even with some of the more eclectic ideas, but also doesn't seem so damned ethereal that by the end, the player has to sort of guess what may have occurred. Here's why I think this one should be on the list. It's sci-fi horror, philosophical depth, as well as asking questions about humanity or lack of it, and its entire premise is relevant with all the talk about AI right now, and where humans will exist along with it. So for that case, even in and of itself, it deserves to be on the list, especially for this Halloween. Next up, Undead Nightmare. Best if you liked Bone Tomahawk or Penny Dreadful. Rockstar backwards compatibility and PC remake incoming. I'm going to talk mostly about the 360 version. When Undead Nightmare first dropped, it took what was already a pretty immersive Western world and infused it with classic horror elements everywhere, and then added everything that the developers at Rockstar had already done so well with the original game. Set in an alternative timeline, Undead Nightmare begins with John returning to his family ranch only to find the entire world in chaos. The dead have risen, and the usually hostile outlaws and wild animals have all been replaced by roving hordes of zombies and feral undead creatures, and the inevitable situation of John's family having both been infected. And of course, John, as John does, decides he's going to find a cure. And by that, I mean shoot everything. And by cure, I mean, no, actually, that part is still right. He's just going to shoot everything. John investigates like Russia does diplomacy. Guns blazing. Undead Nightmare adds a ton of stuff I never expected when I first played this game. New weapons, mythical creatures, and John's wife and son being the crux of the plot as you move forward. But it's the monsters that rock here, and I don't mean the typical zombies you see in Red Dead. It's the fact that you can find and tame the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, or in this case, just horses themselves. You have war, pestilence, famine, and death, and you also have the exclusive and elusive Chupacabra. Those supernatural beings all add a new layer to the adventure and reward you for exploring in the game world, which is smaller than the original title. It's really one of those rare expansions that not only become its own thing, but also somehow reflects the original game and the fiction that was originally presented. The cold and calculated men and women and wild and worrisome strangers that were in the original game are replaced many times by zombies here. But you find yourself thinking that the monsters you're facing in Undead Nightmare may not actually be as bad as the people you faced or talked to in Red Dead. And weirdly enough, this line of work fits John's way more in the original game. And it's in that way very much that it reminds me of Ballad of Gay Tony and Lost to the Damned. Of course, it's still got the insane voice actors from the original game here. But the reason why this game works is it's straight B-movie fodder, a Western-based zombie movie game form, with all the goofiness that's in the movie genre itself, but also from the original creators of Red Dead. The story structure's changed. You're not world traveling. You're trying to go around, do specific things, and hunting down specific characters to find this cure. And it all comes together over the top of a narrative that, weirdly enough, fits almost like a nightmare from the original game. It's a huge tonal shift, though. I mean, it's not like the Wild West and Red Dead was packed, but there's something creepy about moving through all these locations you had just explored and only finding the scatterings of particular still human NPCs hiding out in locations. And that shift reinforces a sense of a world falling apart, creating this unique experience that I was never expecting from the original game. But why is this worth being on the list? Because it's that corny B movie of a game made by some of the best game makers at the height of creation, with characters we know in situations we never expected. The remaster or remake is coming on PC soon, so you can always jump in there and play it. Next up, Madison. This is best if you like the movies like The Conjuring. Madison was developed by Bloodiest Games, and compared to a lot of other titles, it is one that is pure scary horror. First-person horror game released in 2022. Hell, it could probably travel back in time 2, 3, 4 years and still be scarier than most games released then. You play as Luca in a haunted house filled with all kinds of weird secrets, trying to survive while uncovering the truth behind a curse that's plagued your entire family. It's like living inside of a Hellraiser box and trying to get out with progressively more complex, or at least thoughtful, puzzles as you continue. Now, one of Madison's signature gameplay mechanics is the use of a Polaroid camera, which plays out as both a tool for solving puzzles and a means of interacting with the haunted environment itself. For instance, the camera's flash not only reveals hidden clues and serves as a momentary light, which sounds about as useful as you just yelling "light" at the top of your lungs to see if it'll work, but it can also uncover and allow for you to see where particular things are in the game that aren't just the clues. The other signature here is the audio, which is fantastic in that horror movie kind of way. All sorts of environments laying out in a nice blanket of sound right before the jump scare. The gameplay largely revolves around solving puzzles and navigating the house's creepy corridors with a mix of environmental exploration and some item-based challenges. The true terror, though, of Madison lies in that excellent oppressiveness around it mixed with a truly scary enemy. The game's effectiveness is also a little bit of stillness and a sense of dread that hangs over everything, with that ambient sound that plays out and consistently sort of generates this feeling of unease. Visuals are pretty good, with grotesque imagery, so be prepared for that. Though the game relies on traditional jump scares a lot, it's that kind of game. When you mix in the camera, the changing locations, and some other excellent specific moments, it's pretty damn good, even if at some point you're going to look at all the puzzles and think to yourself, who in the fuck had all the time on their hands to build all these? But it works. Interestingly enough, one of the claims to fame of Madison is that it doesn't seem to fall off when it comes to atmosphere as it continues throughout. Now, why do I think this one should be on here? Because it feels like it mirrors a great deal of horror movies we're seeing in the last 5 to 6 years, a mind towards a more brutal and super evil slant, not always worrying about explaining every single thing. But it also has some mechanics that players who recognize that age-old Polaroid camera will enjoy, and people who never saw one will wonder, how in the hell did humanity continue after inventing this demonic device? Next up, and it has to be on the list, I reviewed this System Shock remake. If you liked Event Horizon, Moon, or maybe Westworld, this one's for you. It's pretty damn meticulous reimagining of the original game as well. All based on board the good ship You're Fucked, also codenamed Citadel Station. Your mission is to outsmart Showdown, a rogue AI with a human subjugation agenda, a penchant for punctuating your successes with perfectly timed punches at your frailty, and a seriously warped idea of what the future should look like. The station, a labyrinth of mutants, cyborgs, traps, all of those are your obstacles. It's pure fantastic and futuristic body horror sci-fi at its best. But one of the reasons why I like this game is it flips it on edge to what we might be seeing now as a reflection in current technology. You're a human-based malware trying to get through Showdown's best defenses, but like a military contractor, not everything's finally running, and some of those gaps aren't filled, be that enemy locations, puzzles, or your own hacking. There's ways for you to progress if you see those gaps. System Shock Remake sticks pretty close to the original game, which was one hell of an immersive sim originally, and keeps it going with a heavy focus on that exploration, but not shying away from combat and a good deal of puzzle solving. You'll navigate this vertical Citadel station across all kinds of floors, gather weapons, tools, and cyberware upgrades to battle enemies, and solve the environmental puzzles as you keep encountering remnants of what Showdown thinks is a good future. The remake just crushes it when it comes to atmosphere and bringing the entire idea of the game into today. One of the best elements of this is the initial treatment of you by the AI like an ant, less so even. But then the more you explore, the more you progress, you realize just like your grandpa tells you nom stories, but ended up getting frustrated by the ants in the backyard who are straight pissing him off. The same exact kind of thing happens here. A character who shows up and originally the AI is like, whatever. As they continue to say, whatever, you realize they're getting more and more stressed even though they're a computer. I love that. Why do I think it's worth it? Once again, it's a reflection on AI, humanity's place in the fight against it. Really couldn't be more timely, and it's just got amazing atmosphere. It looks excellent, and it's fun as hell, which helps as well. Next up, Phasmophobia. If you like Paranormal Activity or The Conjuring or any of the million of Ghostbusters TV shows on YouTube, this is probably for you. It's a multiplayer psychological horror game developed by Kinetic Games. It has you take on the roles of paranormal investigators tasked with exploring haunted locations and identifying the types of ghosts that are inhabiting them. This involves using all kinds of different hunting tools like EMF readers, night vision cameras, spirit boxes, all of this allowing you to collect further evidence in identifying those ghosts. It's Ghostbusters through an Exorcist filter and with a whole hell of a lot of paranormal activity rubbed into it. And it actually is packed with content. It's got over 24 different spirit types so far as well. The core gameplay revolves around exploring all these locations from small suburban homes and large asylums with a team of up to 4 other people. Here, your primary objective is to collect evidence to determine that type of ghost. Each ghost has distinct traits and behaviors requiring you to use different strategies to get the information that you're going to require. Once identified, players can then also do extra objectives to earn extra rewards like capturing photos or getting all kinds of different evidence from the game or just taking off. One of the standout features of Phasmophobia is its use of in-game voice recognition. Players can communicate with a ghost by speaking directly into whatever headset or microphone you have, asking questions and provoking them. I love me some audio, so the idea of integrating this in is awesome. How many times have we seen some ghost-busting neckbeard inside of a haunted house on YouTube yelling at ghosts? Now you can. The game also introduces some different unpredictability in the title. Ghosts and Phasmophobia can become hostile if players disturb them too much or fail to respect their overall locations in space. When a ghost becomes agitated, it'll hunt down the player, turn off lights, block exits, and generally just try to scare the shit out of you. Also, you can play it in VR if you're up to that. In the entire industry of scary games, there's something or many somethings that make Phasmophobia intriguing to a lot of the players in the fan base. It's not just a scary factory, it's not just slow investigation, it's not just hiding from ghosts. It's a bunch of different parts put together, and it does it quite well. And in particular, it shows that horror games, or in this case, maybe what we would call a scary game, can work not only alone, but in groups without really losing anything. Why do I think this is worth it? Listen, Phasmophobia does a perfect job of bringing tech into the horror game market without all the hunga kind of look at ray-traced rendering that we're doing in this game and all of the nerd arguments over it. It looks good without purposely grinding your system down to a halt, and again, it can be enjoyed alone or with others. It is a fantastic title. Next up, Pathologic II. This is if you like The Village, Annihilation, or maybe Midsummer. Pathologic II places you in the shoes of a healer returning to his hometown to find it ravaged by some kind of plague known as the Sand Pest. As this character, you have to navigate all over this crumbling town, try to figure out the desperation and fear and superstitions that all the characters have, and put the clues together. The game's narrative is split across 12 days, each day presenting new challenges and dilemmas that directly impact all of the town's inhabitants and, of course, the story and you. This isn't just about survival. It's about deciding who lives and who dies and coming to terms with the consequences of all those choices and also putting them all together. Who's right, who's wrong. It's pretty goddamn difficult as well. What makes the game so unique is the focus on the human condition in the face of what is an utter catastrophe. Characters are fairly layered with different motivations and fear, and that seeps over into everything you're doing. There's this sense of doom that sits around the game world the entire time you're playing it. There's unease in a way that's like that guy in a store who seems just a bit off, and every time you go to a different aisle, somehow he's there as well. That is here all the time. Also, this game is not just a horror game, it's a survival game. And like I said, it's pretty friggin' brutal. You have to manage a lot within the game world. Hunger, exhaustion, thirst, and health while scavenging for resources, performing healing tasks, and watching that countdown timer. The consistent threat of the doomsday clock counting down the ticks with each talk until it strikes doom is one of the best parts. Everything you do takes time, so you're consistently balancing hard decisions about who to save, who to talk to, and what you want to do and when to rest. It's a game that forces you to consistently judge the just get it done versus the maybe let's help some others kind of gameplay. Visually, the game does feature pretty surreal and unsettling imagery. I would warn you on that. The game looks multiple times like it's got different time frames and cultures coming together within it. It actually really does. The technological mixed almost with the mythic or a clan-like, native-like culture of odd symbolism right next to bits of technology. This feeds into the story and the narrative where you're constantly at odds. Rather than spelling things out, it also embraces a lot of ambiguity and leaves it up to the player in particular situations. Why do I think this one should be on the list? I don't always need ghosts leaping like aged WWE wrestlers trusting their ancient ACLs to the pity of gravity in front of me. Sometimes it's slow, it's ebbing, it's about crushing atmosphere and mystery. It's about that tick-tock of the doomsday clock. This fits perfectly. And another one that fits perfectly, Clive Barker's Undying. If you liked American Horror Story or the others, this one might be for you. It's set in the 1920s. Undying follows your protagonist, which is Patrick, a veteran of World War I and an expert in the occult. But it's also based in Ireland, a place you just normally don't see in a lot of games like this. And Patrick is summoned by his best friend Jeremiah, and you arrive at Jeremiah's home and this giant family estate to uncover the mystery behind a series of strangely horrifying supernatural events. Jeremiah's siblings, once very close to him as a family, have all succumbed to some terrible illness, turning them into monstrous beings that are hidden around the estate. The game's narrative draws players into a terrifying world. It's filled with all kinds of family secrets, dark rituals, and, well, you could say unspeakable horrors, but I can speak about them right now. Written with the collaboration of Clive Barker, the story captures the essence of gothic horror with a strong emphasis on atmosphere, fear, and psychological descent of characters, but it also mixes in some combat. Be aware this game is a sign of its times, so it's a bit crunchy, but Clive Barker's Undying attempts at bringing something unique, and in the release time frame of this game coming out, it actually aged better than I expected it to. One of the game's most lauded features is the different powers. For instance, the scry ability, which allows players to see beyond the normal veil of reality, revealing all kind of different ghosts, whispers from the past, or haunted secrets. It's all world within worlds within worlds, and like Clive Barker's novels, fictions, it presents itself as a nod toward what actually occurs versus what we think may be going on. Magic with a C versus magic with a K. But Patrick's no fool. He shows up to fight too, and throughout the game you can get some guns, because sometimes investigations involve shooting somebody until they're dead, or a clue until it gets destroyed. You get handguns, shotguns, and crossbows, and add to that some of those spells. The best part of Undying to me is, regardless of how you take it on, it's really in no hurry. It lets the story unfold as you use scry to find different clues, move around the locations, and then interact with things to further the story. While it's got a shooter core, it's got an investigator's heart, and the skin of a walking sim sometimes. It's hard to describe my love for this game sometimes. While Clive can be notoriously wayward in his writing, Undying and its narrative wrapped around the family curse and the easy nods and fist bumps to H.P. Lovecraft as they pass one another at their narrative water cooler help this move forward and feel newer than it actually is. Why do I like this one, and why do I think it fits? It's because while many horror games do rely on their story, Undying was written by Clive Barker, who at the time was considered one of the greats in the moment. And that means also that his underlying fiction can present itself in a format for a story that's possibly easier for newer horror game fans to digest, or just be a little less ethereal than many other titles here. And especially if you're a history buff or a location buff, this does deliver a place that's unique in both of those ways. Speaking of unique, let's talk about the next up, and that's Sanitarium. So if you liked Shutter Island, Session 9, or Asylum, here's another one that you may never have heard of. Sanitarium is a point-and-click adventure game from 1998, and it was created by Dreamforge. You play through this weird narrative that blends psychological horror with mystery, offering an experience that, to me, was pretty profound at the time. The game's often hailed for its super dark storytelling as well, and I would have to say that is the exact remembrance that I have of it. You're Max, waking up in an eerie mental asylum with bandages covering your head like a damn mummy, and no memory of who or how he got there. Yes, it's deep into the amnesia trope, but it does it well. From the starting point there, the game embarks on this journey through multiple worlds because Max's mind's like a streaming service's pricing tiers. It's cut into so many slices, it's almost inconceivable, and you try to put them back together. You move through each world slowly, piecing Max's identity and the history for him together while trying to also figure out how he got there in the first place. Now, be aware it's an older title, so it's going to have some pretty triggering events and thoughts compared to many of the neutered games that we play today. It's going back to a more brutal and cutting idea and methodology and methods of old school treatment that in many ways probably did more damage than good. But in a horror game, that works perfectly. To me, what sets Sanitarium apart from a lot of the other games here is the way it merges the gameplay with the storytelling. The puzzles are designed to feel like an organic part of the actual story itself. It's not just a door puzzle, it's a puzzle reflecting treatment or the effects of it. The game's also divided into different chapters representing different parts of Max himself, from little snippets of towns inhabited by weird children to Aztec ruins and creepy circuses. But it's not only those locations that you go to, it's the delivery of them and the viewpoint. You don't just see this kind of horror game very often, and certainly not as much anymore, and a mix of mental tragedy with point and click lets you see your character in totality in a 360 degree around them, and it just plays out differently. It feels like a game that somehow has a 100-mile view that still oddly feels personal, and in that way, it's absolutely unique, and that's why it's on my list. Next up, in a game you guys probably know was going to be on my list, and that's Resident Evil 7. This is good if you like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Evil Dead, or House of a Thousand Corpses. On the list, it's probably my favorite title. First, the game was a huge shift from the original line of games in tone, with a homicidal family led by a dad who can Kool-Aid Man right through walls and looks like Herschel from the Walking Dead show, but missed a couple dozen meals and then just said screw it and embraced that kind of lifestyle. And it was first-person perspective, insanely claustrophobic, a focus on psychological horror, and a far close to Western style than the prior games. The narrative and visual design of Resident Evil 7 draws a lot of inspiration from different things, including Texas Chainsaw Massacre and The Evil Dead, as well as earlier entries in the Resident Evil series in some places. It's a return to what I felt was a more intimate, like housebound setting that recalled the haunted mansion of the original game. Playing as Ethan, it's just a normal dude looking for his missing wife, and you end up somehow at the Baker homestead, which is this depleted, decrepit shithovel of the worst kind in some backwards part of Louisiana. And you end up becoming a dinner guest and perhaps almost dinner for a family, and you only end up barely getting out and exploring this massive location, finding out about the family and its connection to your wife Mia in Umbrella. One of the larger changes here, as I spoke before, is that viewpoint, both in and out of VR, because this one launched on the original PSVR system as well. It brought you closer to the exploration, to the combat, and to the horror environments that you explored, while also not breaking some of the Resident Evil tropes, like exploration, puzzle solving, and managing inventory and resources. The game somewhat focuses on the typical Umbrella connection a little bit less than you might expect, but more so on the characters in that family. Each family member represents a different style of horror as well. One reason why I love the game is it's not all about fighting family members best left for later, it's the locations. The Baker estate's huge. It's like any Resident Evil game. It's also filled with all kinds of hidden hallways, puzzles, even creatures you need to fight, and bits of information that you can get as you explore. The developers had a huge attention to detail here, and it plays out across the audio. It's one of the better games when it comes to the audio spectrum. And I suggest headphones for this one. The reason the game was so widely loved, even with a couple years later seeing Village have its own fair share of which game is better polls, it's because ultimately it felt like Resident Evil had lost a little bit of its juice. Resident Evil 7's a bit like a rest stop between two long stretches of road. And while they didn't return to the old style in their prime number games, the remakes have benefited from 7's change-up because it offers something different, so that pattern of repetitiveness isn't so pronounced. Why is this game on my list? Ultimately, the best part of Resident Evil 7 is the feeling that not is all as it seems. And yet, right in front of you are three people at a dinner table that looks like it's from Sweetmeats Buffet. And that's the normal part. And then some other stuff happens. I won't ruin it, but honestly, Resident Evil 7 has withstood the test of time for me without any caveats, usually buried in discussions about favorite horror games or even favorite Resident Evil games. Resident Evil 7 is just flatly my favorite. Moving to something a little different, my next up on the list, Alien Isolation. This is good if you liked, Alien, but also The Thing, or Life. It was created by Creative Assembly and released by Sega in 2014, and it's based, of course, on the Alien universe. The game's set about 15 years after the events of the first Alien film, and it follows Amanda Ripley, the daughter of Ellen, who's on a mission to uncover the truth behind her disappearance. Amanda's investigation leads to this decaying space station where she discovers a single alien has turned the once bustling hub into a graveyard of bodies, or bodies creating bodies inside of their bellies. Throughout Alien Isolation, Amanda has to navigate across all the space station while evading the alien, encountering different androids and desperate human survivors along the way. The game's narrative unfolds through a lot of environmental storytelling, logs, and Amanda's encounters with some people still left on the station. Alien Isolation is just a damned masterclass when it comes to survival horror. You're constantly focused on your existence as a human versus any kind of idea that you can compete for very long against it. The feeling of consistently being limited, but also that celebration of escaping the alien is an odd mix, but one that is like a damned drug high. Relying on gadgets like the motion tracker and distraction devices means that the audio work is consistently informing you, and that beep, beep, beep becoming its own music as it speeds up until, boom, alien. And it's the alien's AI that is easily one of the high points here. It's been lauded by developers and designers pretty much since the day the game came out. It's not built like many other games with true scripting. Instead, it uses a partnership of pretty much two brains, tracking and dynamically reacting to the player's location and the actions after it's being filtered through an original AI that sometimes throws red herrings and lies into the information, resulting in the alien still being incredibly dangerous, but also meaning that the information it gets about sounds and things that it sees not always resulting in a one-for-one reaction, and instead adapting the information with a bit of programmed-in fuzzy logic. But it's not all just aliens. It's like the movie where the androids weren't good guys either, and you consistently have to contend with hostile androids. These guys are working Joes is what they're called, and you're just consistently trying to not get murdered by them as well as helping everybody out, and they are always showing up at the worst possible time ever. Also, you have some survivors, as I said, and there's some mystery there. One of the greatest triumphs of this game to me is the dedication to capturing the feel of the original game. There was a ton of work to make sure that that retro-futuristic design, the old crusty chipped CRT monitors, pipes, filaments, fitments, broken tiles, and everything else works to deliver an incredible horror game. Why is this on my list? Listen, Alien Isolation does so much right, it's hard to imagine it not being on the list. The fuzzy AI, the alien design, the mystery that Amanda follows that's connected to the movies, it makes this one fit perfectly. It is hyper enjoyable. Next one's a little closer in time, but I do want to mention it. Silent Hill 2 Remake. If you like Silent Hill, the movie, or The Mist, or Twin Peaks, Silent Hill 2 Remake is one of those titles that we have been anticipating for a long time, developed by Bloober Team, and it hit the ground running. I feel like it's hard to imagine someone this close to Halloween and this close to Bloober Team's excellent port who hasn't decided to jump into it yet, especially if they have any kind of desire for horror games. But this is a video about what to play, not a video about making people feel bad if they haven't got to something yet. The game follows the story of James, who receives a mysterious letter from his late wife Mary asking him to come to some fog-covered town called Silent Hill. Yeah, that's right. Late wife. So if it seems weird, it starts out weird and continues that way throughout. The remake retains the original story structure and multiple endings based on the player's actions, allowing players to unravel the mysteries of the town in different ways. It dives into psychological horror, forcing players to really question everything about James' story, and unfolds throughout all these weird environments and disturbing encounters. One of the key updates in the remake is the complete overhaul of the combat system, making it feel a bit better for modern audiences while still maintaining that feeling that James controls like a box of smashed assholes. But maybe actually a little bit less. A bit more movable, a bit more mobile, but always reflecting that this dude's idea of a gun is probably what shoots out shirts at the local high school basketball game. As a remake, it looks phenomenal, and Bloober Team nailed the idea of bringing the old game into the future. They've changed up some of the puzzles, added in new locations, and adjusting characters and sometimes what information they give consistently brings surprises to those who may have played the original game. Now, why is this on the list? Silent Hill 2, ignoring its classic status from decades ago, is a well-done horror game for right now. It looks excellent. It consistently has you at odds with a man who isn't prepared to do things that you should prepare to do, requests from players a bit more thinking on their feet than you might get in some other titles. In that way, the surprise of this game and the excellence of its delivery means it's a creepy-ass title, creepy-ass looking characters, creepy-ass looking place, and there's no way it wasn't going to be on the list. Next up, and this is a game that shows that it doesn't have to be straight horror to fit on a list and be something good for Halloween if you just want to sit down and be a little creeped out, and that's The Last of Us Part 1. If you like The Road, Children of Man, or I Am Legend, or The Walking Dead, this one's for you. And a lot of us know about this title, but I just want to cover it a little bit. The Last of Us is set in a world that's, of course, ravaged by the cordyceps fungi, a real-life fungus that in the game's world mutates to infect humans and turns them basically into zombies. The infection has led to this collapse of civilization prior, turning a lot of the population into zombie-like creatures that they call the infected. And the story takes place about 20 years after that initial outbreak. Joel, the main character, is tasked with smuggling Ellie out of a quarantine zone to a group of characters known as the Fireflies who believe they can develop a cure using her immunity, which you find out pretty quickly within the game. The journey is all about you navigating across different regions of the United States, dealing with both the infected but also the evil, bastardly humans that you find throughout the world, like raiders and militia groups. For a third-person game, it also has very good combat for what it's trying to deliver. It's got some smart and tricky programming for enemies that can make it feel more alive than most enemies in a lot of other games. Throughout the game, you're also using resources, which are very scarce, forcing you to consistently decide when and where to use them. The scarcity, I think, actually enhances a lot of the survival in the game because every bullet and medkit counts, and you have to judge that against the sounds that you'll be making when you attack enemies, because most of this game is based on either sight or sound when it comes to the enemies, when it comes to the militia, or Joel and Ellie figuring out what's going on in the game world. While yes, this game is certainly not of the horror type, it is a desolate game, it is a dire game, and to me it fits the idea of a title that many people would want to play during Halloween. And that's why it fits. It's great. It plays well. Voice acting is top-notch. And where many times horror games, even zombie games, are missing one aspect of a good game's triangle of elements needed to be considered excellent, The Last of Us 1 doesn't. And a classic title that, if you haven't played it or you're thinking of something to replay, this might be it. Be aware it is a longer game, and like some of these, would probably require a couple days. Next up, The Evil Within. If you liked Mouth of Madness or Resident Evil, The Evil Within is a third-person survival horror game that came out all the way back in 2014, and it's brought to you by Tango Gameworks. You play as a detective, and right from the start, things get nuts. You and your team are checking out this massive murder at a mental hospital, but before you know it, you're thrown into a nightmare reality created by an entity that can control pretty much everything. The whole time you're pushing through all these weird environments, mixed up asylum horrors, and whatever different things that this creature or entity wants to create. The way they've mixed up the psychological horror with classic survival horror mechanics is pretty brilliant, honestly. You're dealing with all these themes of madness, manipulation, loss, and the story's all fragmented in a way that keeps you consistently second-guessing what's real. And it has you constantly bouncing between encounters and broken memories that give you this intentionally ambiguous feeling. The combat, well, you got to be smart about it. You're working with Sebastian's limited weapons. You got pistols and shotguns and crossbows, and trust me, you'll need to make every single shot count. Sometimes sneaking around is going to be your best bet. The game doesn't pull any punches either. You need to have quick reflexes and some solid planning, because it does actually have some encounters that are pretty difficult. Why does this game fit? Why should it be here versus some others? Well, it's not really a versus situation. This is just some of the ideas of titles I like. And I would say the voice acting, it's not always great, but it's pretty much non-stop tension. But it's more about just raw human experiences and surviving. The Evil Within is basically a love letter to old school survival horror, mixing some mind-bending psychological elements with some very visceral scenes and some scary moments here and there, with some jump scenes. Just overall, a good game if you're into Halloween-style play-a-thons. Next up, Dead Space Remake. If you liked Event Horizon Sunshine or Pandorum, this one's for you. Dead Space Remake is just a fantastic title that, while it is a remake of the original game, doesn't go out of its way to change everything. Set aboard a mining ship overrun by grotesque enemies known as the Necromorphs, the game follows engineer Isaac. Isaac uncovers this weird plot involving an ancient alien artifact called the Marker, and it's a game in many ways that is very sinister. It's about control, alien influence, body horror, and has quite a few jump scares. Most of the game takes place inside the large ship, which means traveling through its bowels, consistently figuring out ways to progress while also fighting off the aliens on board and trying to uncover the reason why the entire place is turned into a Detroit IHOP at 3 a.m., where everyone just wants to beat the shit out of everybody else. In many ways, the game feels like the movie Aliens or like an Alien-style game, with you consistently on the move throughout the ship, knowing that any crevice, cave-like entrance, or cargo holder can hold another enemy that can leap out and turn you into a red smear on the wall at any times. It's third-person combat, survival horror, with some pretty good action and some unique weapons that consistently have you experimenting as you play through the game. And it's a stressful game at times, consistently moving between exploration and discovery against mystery and mayhem, but it never really leans heavily in one way or the other. You're always moving towards the next stressful moment. Dead Space also nails atmosphere. One of the best games when it comes to atmosphere I've experienced in years, and when I was playing it for the review, I was like, definitely when Halloween comes up, I'm going to be playing this game again. While it doesn't go out of its way to change up the core gameplay loops we've seen in a lot of other titles, it does deliver a story that is quite impactful and pretty much sinister as hell when you really think about it. And it definitely deserves to be on the list. Speaking about that, this list is, let's see, 40 minutes long. We'll stop there, but I'll give you some honorable mentions real quick, because I know people are like, what the hell? There's games like Outlast, which I think cemented itself as pretty much a classic. There's also honorable mentions like Until Dawn or The Quarry, Alan Wake 1 and 2, obviously, Control, if you like that bureaucracy horror, and all of the weird supernaturalness of Fringe or X-Files. You got Signalis. You have Hunt Showdown if you like your shooter with a little horror in it, and many more. All of them fitting in what I think perfect lists for Halloween and a Halloween tribute. What about yours? I'd like to know. Those are just some of the games I like for Halloween, or I would want to replay, or suggest that other people replay them. You might even wonder, hey, a couple of these KARAK didn't actually love day one. Doesn't matter. Halloween games, well, any games really, I can see the good parts in them and the good parts of them and the parts that the developers wanted to deliver. Regardless if I liked them or if they scared me, I still know that they will scare others. That's why they're on the list, and that's why I suggest you check at least a couple of these out. Peace out. If you don't check out the podcast, you are a horror character antagonist right away. You need to check it out, the Best Gaming Podcast, on a separate channel. You'll see the link in the descriptions. And you can also become a patron of mine and check out behind the scenes, as well as things like streaming games, D&D games, board games, and get information before it ever comes out to anybody else. Peace out. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, especially if it involves Halloween.